Well, welcome. That's good. Keep going. All right. In case somebody's interested, we got plans in the back in case you need to build an ark.
It's off.
And this time, leave the
Gary?
mosquitoes out.
It's off.
It's off. Okay, maybe I'll turn it on. That might help. If you can find unicorns, get them on the ark. I don't know what happened to them last time, but they didn't make it. Well, welcome to week 3. Nancy and Ted, sitting over here, are the ones responsible for the snacks, so thank you. Probably a little more Nancy than Ted. Yeah, carry them. I'm looking around. I don't think there's anybody here for the first time. You've been here before. Okay. Yeah. Stranger. Are you getting the emails okay? All right.
Yeah, I didn't get just this week, I didn't get the ones with the challenges in it.
Oh.
But my husband got it. So I just opened his email today and saw it. And I said, I didn't get that email. I don't know why.
Well, we do have the sign up in the back if there's a problem. Okay.
Yeah, I've been getting emails.
Oh, okay.
I just didn't get that one.
Huh. And by the way, if you come across something really interesting as far as apologetics goes that I'm not aware of, and I don't get on Facebook very often, so if you see something that sounds interesting that you'd like me to send out to everybody, just let me know, and I'll be happy to. In fact, that brings up a question. We haven't really been pushing this very hard, but I'm just wondering if there's anything that happened during the week where you heard a statement being said, or you're watching a television show, or there's a movie or a song or anything where you said, hey, they're treading in the area of apologetics somehow. Anything come up during this week?
Well, I did a Buddhist wedding on Friday night.
You officiated or what? Okay. You officiated at a Buddhist wedding. Okay, my head is hurting. How does that work?
Well, in the Buddhist faith, religion it's not a religion.
That's true.
So I checked with the Evangelical Church Alliance, which does my ecclesiastical endorsement for the guard,
Yeah.
to make sure there wasn't any problem with it. And I don't have any problem with legitimizing a relationship if two people are committed to each other, as opposed to just living together.
Yeah.
Well, the neat thing was that airman was, the following night at the Service Member of the Year banquet, he was recognized as a airman, a senior airman of the year.
Oh.
And he got to his wife walked down with him.
Oh, wow. Okay.
The Vietnamese couple.
I'll tell you one thing about Buddhism that always intrigued me. I'd like to sit down and ask a Buddhist sometime. The whole point of Buddhism is to stop desire, because desire brings misery, and that's our problem. We desire things, so we got to stop desiring things. I always thought, but isn't that a desire? I really want to stop desiring things. Well, okay, anyway. I wanted to share something with you that really hit us hard. Do you remember for those of you that came last set of classes, we were doing some evangelizing outreach things. We had the flip charts, and then we had a guy named Larry here who came, and he kind of sat, I think, toward the center here. And he came and he did this EvangeCube where you could flip it all around. Well, it just came out of the blue, but he passed away Wednesday. Yeah, and he and I played tennis together. We were at Orange Glen High as teachers together, and I've known him for years and years and years. And then I kind of lost track of him, and he wasn't a Christian back then. He was a nice guy, and his son became a Christian, got involved with InterVarsity, or what's the other one? Young Life, yeah, and kind of influenced Larry. And Larry and his wife became Christians. This is his wife, Pat, and she's had a lot of health issues as well, and so we're mourning the loss of Larry, but we know he's better off. But now Pat is, so I'd just like you guys to pray for the family, especially. Pat's going to have, people that can get her places and things like that. But really sweet couple, and they've got 3 kids, and so it's going to be tough. If you remember them well enough and you want to get involved in this, on the 23rd, which is a Saturday, at 11 o'clock at Valley Center Community Church. They're going to have a memorial service over there. Larry got so excited about apologetics he was a Christian and he was real involved in his church and did a lot of outreach things, but I guess he just hadn't, I don't know, never bumped up against apologetics. And so he started coming to this class, and it was like he couldn't get enough. He was just reading and reading and reading, and just went so big on it. And he started talking to his pastor over there at Valley Center Community Church, and he and another guy set up like a 6-week or 7-week apologetics program, and they just packed the place out. And it was fun. I went over there and spoke one time on the existence of the soul, and they had all these different topics. And I said, this is what we're after, that the fire gets lit here, and people go out, and the fire extends different places, and people carry the enthusiasm and carry the ideas and make things happen, whether it's a small group or at his church or whatever. And his pastor was behind it, and the youth pastor was behind it, and they said they want to do another series later on, so it's going to have to be in memory of Larry. So, but I thought that was neat that he got started with that. But his outreach was really impressive. He was always going down to Tijuana and working with kids there from a Christian perspective. So I'm going to miss him. Really nice guy. So I sent out 4 questions. The fourth one was actually the one from the week before that we didn't get to. So this is kind of a leftover. So we're going to, oh, by the way, I brought some books. Are they already gone? Almost. One that's still over there is called Not God's Type. Does that ring a bell at all? No? Yes? Holly Ordway. Yeah, years ago, I was listening to Greg Kokel. Okay, are you surprised? Steve and I work his name in, I guess, about every week. So I was listening to Greg Kokel, and he was talking about this Holly Ordway person, and come to find out she was a professor over at Maricosta, which is, almost throw a stone and hit them on the way, 78 on the way to the coast. And she became a Christian, and she became a Christian because of a guy at this church, and a guy who's come to our apologetics in the past, Josh Runyon. If you know Josh, the airplane pilot, and his schedule is such that he can't come to a lot of our meetings. But anyway, so when she started mentioning all this stuff, my ears perked up, and so I called her over there and I said, hey, would you ever be interested in coming over and just talking to our apologetics class about what you did? She said, sure. So if you go to the EFCC Apologetics page and click down and take a look under audio and video that we have, you'll see it's something like Holly Ordway, O-R-D-W-A-Y. You can hear her testimony, but it's in brief. It's so powerful. I shouldn't spoil it because it's in the book. Yeah, I'll spoil it a little bit. So she's down at UCSD, and she's interested in fencing, and Josh is a fencing coach. And so she's on the bus with him and talking to him a lot, and she's just a hardcore, secularist. But the way he got the Christian message across is so powerful, because he didn't just pin her down and just beat Jesus into her. I mean, he did it in a really thoughtful way. And I thought, oh, what a message for all of us. What a model for Christian behavior, because he took his time and he was really kind about it. And he never, challenged her or tried to push her into a corner or see her as a target or anything like that. And they just started talking. And so this is her story. It's called Not God's Type. And now it's kind of fun to watch her career, because I see her name every once in a while. She was at Maricosta. She's now a full-time professor over at Houston Baptist. And Houston Baptist has become kind of like Biola Midwest. I mean, it's getting huge. It's getting big in apologetics. They've got Nancy Piercy is there, and Mike Lacona. Any other names I'm missing?
I can't remember off the top of my head, but they form kind of an enclave of women in apologetics that's become very well known.
Oh, I'm so glad to see that. I mean, we need more Holly Ordways. Natasha Crane is doing that now as a stay-at-home mom. You ever heard of her? Take a look sometime. C-R-A-I-N, Crane, and she has a website, and she got so many hits on this website. People got so interested in her comments about Christianity and challenged her that she is now writing books to help parents make sure their kids don't drift from the faith, like we're starting to see, unfortunately. So, yeah, thank goodness we're getting some women, because this is not supposed to be a guy's thing. It's not, it's for everybody. We're all supposed to go out and make a case for the truth of Christianity. So Holly is just a really neat person. I'm just glad to see her doing well there. Why did I drift off on that? I can't remember. The book, okay. And we've got a video over there too, and I forgot which one I brought. Oh, I know. It's Lee Strobel's Case for Faith, but it's not the movie, so I don't want you to get disappointed. This is Lee Strobel himself talking about his change that happened. So, if you like that, that's good too. Obviously, the movie's more polished.
Wasn't it Case for Christ?
What did I say? Case for Faith. Sorry. It is.
Case for Christ.
I think
That
that
one there
is
is
case for faith.
Oh, that one's the Case for Faith. Okay, sorry. I thought I brought the Case for Christ. Anyway. Yeah, so the Case for Faith is really good too. It's a tearjerker. There's a story toward the back of it that'll just tear your heart. So I won't. You can discover that on your own. Anyway, so we're doing. We'll see how far we get. Again, I'm not trying to race through any of this. So if you want to spend a lot of time on these things, you have a lot of questions, that's fine. That's great. So I just gave you this week. I sent you the 4 things. One is the leftover from the week before, and then 3 new ones. And we'll see. I may be way too optimistic to think we can get through all of that in one evening. So no problem. So this is the leftover. How do you know that Jesus really lived? Is there confusion? Is there controversy about whether Jesus really lived? Where would you send people to go? And the first thing you're going to do is probably say, well, he's in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And then you get people that are going to, say, yeah, but that's just all propaganda. Those are fairy tales for adults. But what were you going to say, Rick?
Well, in addition to all the,
Do we need it'll pick up better on the recording if we can get the mic. Thanks, Alan.
The standard argument is that the scriptures can actually be almost related back to the time of Christ when they're first written. There's enough manuscript evidence to actually show that. And that Luke refers to all the witnesses that are still around.
Yeah.
As validation of that. But what I go to would be the Jewish Roman historian Flavius Josephus, who clearly makes the statement of Christ. He doesn't come out as a believer.
Yeah.
But this is a Jewish Roman historian.
Which I think makes it more powerful. If you can get non-believers to tell you Jesus was around, that to me is like hitting it out of the ballpark. Yeah, so Josephus is, he's a Jewish guy, and he was controlling Jewish forces as they were beginning to fight the Romans in the late 60s AD. And then the Romans captured him, and he kind of knew which side was going to win. Pretty obvious. Anybody that fights the Romans is probably going to be on the losing end. So all of a sudden he starts getting along real well with Vespasian, who is the Roman leader, and he told Vespasian, someday you're going to be emperor. And Vespasian went back to Rome, and he became the emperor. And so he remembered Josephus and had Josephus come, and he just kind of lived a life of wealth and got to sit back and just write anything he wanted to do. He wanted to do stuff on the history of the Jews. So Josephus wrote his annals, he called it, and his antiquities, and Jesus mentioned twice in there. There's one part where they're a little iffy. They think maybe some Christian later that was copying it, threw in some stuff because it says somebody's probably the Messiah. Well, Josephus didn't really believe that, and that may have been added. Okay, so that's a little bit controversial, although most people think that most of it is still true, what he said about Jesus. But there's another part where he mentions James. Yeah, go ahead, Rick.
Flavius Josephus, there's a book called Jerusalem's Traitor about Flavius Josephus. It's really fascinating.
Basically, he was trying to get the Jewish people to surrender to the Romans, realizing the Romans were going to completely wipe them out. They didn't do that. And that's what caused him to turn over and go over to the Roman side and give the Roman extra help as far as defeating the Jews.
Yeah. What was I going to say about Josephus? I lost it. Anyway, Rick, you had a...
Another historian that hated the Christians, he was Pliny the Younger. He vehemently hated the Christians, but he confirmed that Jesus did live. And I think he talked about him being crucified, too.
Yeah, see, I want to get back to him in just a second. Something that always intrigued me about Vespasian, there were rumors circulating all during this time of Jesus that there was a king that was coming out of Judea. So this is not anything made up by the Bible. I mean, people were expecting this. There were all these stories and all these rumors, and Vespasian went to Rome after the fighting against the Jews, and he said, hey, you know these stories about an emperor coming out of Judea? That's me. And that kind of helped him. It got him into power. So I thought that was interesting that there were those powerful stories that were already circulating during that time period. Yeah, so he mentions, Josephus mentions, oh, by the way, if you can pick up a copy that just talks about what it was like to be in Jerusalem when the Romans had surrounded the city, it's just horrifying. It got so bad. They just starved those people where they started eating the dead. I mean, it was just awful. And people estimate maybe 1 million Jews lost their lives during the siege. And Josephus just makes your hair stand on end when you read it today. It's still powerful. But he mentions in another part that people say is legit. He talks about James. In fact, I want to read you just a section of this. This is Josephus. He's talking about the high priest, Ananus. I don't know if that's the same as Ananias, but it says Ananus. Convened the judges of the Sanhedrin and brought before them a man named James, the brother of Jesus, who is called the Christ, and certain others. He accused them of having transgressed the law and delivered them up to be stoned. So, I mean, do you hear that? He doesn't tell you any more about James as if he expects his audience to understand. If I just tell you he's the brother of Jesus, everybody goes, oh, okay, got it. So apparently the name of Jesus had spread quite a bit by the time that Josephus is writing this. So I thought that was interesting. He just says, James, the brother of Jesus. So that's the way, instead of, the son of so-and-so or coming from a city, he names the person that you would associate James with. By the way, they think they found the bone box of Ananias, the high priest during this time. But okay, and then you mentioned Pliny or whatever is the younger. Yeah, let me just read you something from him. This guy was a governor in the time period of, see if I can find it here, 109 to 110. So we're, in the 2nd century, but just barely. And he's got all these pesky Christians all over the place. He's writing back to Rome saying, because he's a Roman authority, saying, what do you want me to do with these? They're driving me nuts. So first of all, what's interesting is this is Turkey. So it's not Judea. The Christian faith has already spread. You've got so many Christians that's driving them nuts, and they're pretty far away, which to me says, if you're going to make up the stories of Jesus later, it's too late, because now the story has spread. If you really want to change the stories, you got to go from place to place and make sure they change all the stories about Jesus. And they're telling the same story. So I don't think anybody went around and tried to make changes happen. It was the same story that happened in Judea, and that story spread all over the place. And he says this. This is part of him talking about these crazy Christians. They were in the habit of meeting on a certain fixed day before it was light, and of singing in alternate verses a hymn to Christ as to a God, and of binding themselves by a solemn oath, etc., etc. Can I read that part just one more time? Singing in alternate verses a hymn to Christ as to a God. So anybody that tells you it took 300 years for the church to decide, hey, we need a really neat Jesus, let's make him divine. This was already in 100 AD, them saying, somebody watching them saying, they're singing as if this guy's a god. And of course, you only had the Roman gods, so we got to put these people in jail or put them to death. Yeah, Rick?
There's another Roman historian at the time of Pliny by the name of Tacitus. He wasn't living at the time of Christ.
Tacitus was not living at the time of Christ, but he was a historian that researched all the records there, and he clearly puts the fact of Jesus' not death, burial, and resurrection, but his life.
Funny you'd mention that. This is a cool little book, by the way. It's a pretty thin book, and it's a new one I just got. Can we trust the Gospels? Because, of course, that's a big debate these days. So he quotes from Tacitus, and Tacitus was around the year 56 is when he was born. So he's still edge of the 1st century into the 2nd century. And let's see, he talked about the Great Fire in Rome that was 64 AD. Now, 64 AD is just 30 years after Jesus, and there already are a bunch of Christians that they're blaming for the fire. At least Nero's blaming for the fire. So look what it's done. It's spread another 20 years. It's all over Turkey. It's in Rome. This is not something that you could control at this point. It's still the same message wherever they go. So nobody is going around monkeying with it. This is an original message that's being spread. And here's what he's talking about, the Great Fire. He says, Nero substituted as culprits a class of men loathed for their vices, whom the crowd called Christians. So things haven't changed very much. If you're in trouble, find a scapegoat. So Nero's going to get off the hook because people didn't like how he handled things, and he looked around and see, who do we not like? How about the Christians? Christus, the founder, had undergone the death penalty in the reign of Tiberius by sentence of the procurator Pontius Pilate. Hey, hear those names? There they are. And this is from a Roman historian who has no interest in Jesus, not a fan of Jesus, but he's giving you a time period there with Tiberius and Pontius Pilate, which is like mid-20s to about mid-30s AD. So he's saying that's when Jesus died. Let me finish this then. And the pernicious superstition was checked for a moment, only to break out once more, not merely in Judea, the home of the disease, but in the capital, Rome itself. It says, and this is the part that's really hard to read. First they were arrested. Vast numbers were convicted. And they were covered with wild beasts' skins and torn to death by dogs. Or they were fastened on crosses. And when daylight failed, they were burned to serve as lamps by night. I mean, these people are our forefathers and foremothers as far as the faith goes, and they hung in there. It would have been very easy because Pliny talks about it. He says, hey, we just bring them in, we just show them a bunch of gods, and we just say, denounce Jesus and worship this, and we'll let you go. That was Pliny's way. He said if they don't, then we go after them big time. So, that must have been what happened at the time of Rome if they would have just said, okay, this is all a joke, sorry, we didn't mean anything by it. But they went to their deaths in the most awful ways. You've heard about being in the Colosseum and stuff. So here they are, being used as lights at night. Tracy.
Yeah, there's a concept here that you don't want to overlook. And that's a concept called enemy attestation. That's one of the kind of criteria that historians use to figure out if something is true or not. Because if you've got folks that have a vested interest, boy, if things go well with the stories about Christ, I gain from it. That you can cast some doubt upon because, they're going to be quite biased in that regard. But if you're biased in the opposite direction, where, I've got nothing to gain by this guy's popularity, there's no reason to lie about it. And so that becomes very powerful. So a skeptic can easily explain away something that is in favor of the storyteller, but something that is against the interest of the storyteller. It's kind of like when the Pharisees said, you're performing miracles by the power of demons. Thank you. You've just confirmed the fact that Jesus performed miracles.
Yeah.
Or that, hey, the disciples stole the body out of the tomb. Thank you for confirming that the tomb is empty. These kinds of things can work very much in our favor because they come from sources that are very unfriendly to Christ.
Yeah. That's a good point. Okay, we got to keep moving on this, I guess. So I always think that's odd that we have to somehow find other sources outside the New Testament documents, because Rick is right. These documents go back to the time of Jesus anyway. And notice I didn't just say the Gospels. I mean, the Gospels are great, but they are from probably the 50s and 60s maybe. If you look at Paul's letters, he's got these little nuggets inside them. I've done a talk on this before. You probably heard it. But they're called creeds. And one of the most famous creeds is 1 Corinthians 15. Take a look at it sometime because Paul lays out this thing. He says, I'm passing along what I heard. And most people who've studied this say Paul is reciting a creed that he got when he went to Jerusalem in the early days after his conversion. In fact, even the critics here say those creeds may go back to the very year that Jesus was crucified and came back to life. And guess what the creeds say? Jesus died, rose again. He's the Son of God. Then you see it's in Philippians, they're in Colossians, they're all over the place. And people are now just kind of starting to discover them and really look at them because it doesn't sound like Paul. And Paul says it's not me. He's using rabbinic language that says, I got it and I'm giving it to you. And so you can even go back to the letters of Paul, and they're earlier than the Gospels. Isn't that weird? They're earlier than the Gospels. So there's some good source. And they talk about Jesus as a real person. So there's Paul's creeds. We already mentioned the Roman historians, Pliny and Tacitus. Jewish historians, we already covered that. You guys are way ahead of me, so nice going. How about the Talmud? This brings up what Tracy was talking about. the Jews over the centuries would collect all the sayings of the rabbis and interpretations of the Old Testament and things like that. So they have this Talmud called the Babylonian Talmud that was kind of collected around the 500s and 600s AD. You know, Jews are all over the place, and they're trying to gather all the information from their wise forefathers. And in the Talmud, they talk about Jesus, and they say exactly what Tracy said. He was a sorcerer and was put to death. Again, thank you very much, because you just admitted that Jesus is doing something supernatural. They just attributed it to the wrong source, but isn't that interesting? So that's in the Jewish Talmud. And almost all respected historians, I won't say every single one because I don't know, but everything I've read, even Bart Ehrman. Okay, Bart Ehrman is the favorite boogeyman today for Christians because he writes books that sell a lot of copies, and he has attacked a lot of things about Christianity, but he said, oh, come on. No historian worth his or her salt is going to say that Jesus never lived. He just doesn't buy into the way some of the Gospels got put together, but that's another issue. But he says, yeah, Jesus was a historical person. So you have to find a crank or somebody who's just trying to be an extremist to write a popular book to suggest that Jesus never lived. So this is a done deal. I mean, you don't really need to argue that much. It's all on our side for that one. Here's another thing you might think about if you want to talk to somebody that says they're not sure Jesus really lived. How in the world do you explain the start of Christianity? Now think about this. What were some of the key beliefs of the Jews? Because this is where it starts. It starts in the middle of Jewish culture. How many gods did they worship? One God. Not three, one God. And where was that God? Up there, not here. They believed in the sacrificial system. They believed in, certain foods that you had to eat. Everything was, set up in a particular way. Super monotheists. They rejected anybody that tried to do anything different. They're always getting themselves in big trouble when somebody would come in and say, worship our gods. No, there's only one God. They were put to death, abused, harassed, all this stuff. And then all of a sudden, here comes a group that says God was on earth. And there's still God up in heaven. What? I mean, if there wasn't Jesus, who's going to sit down? What good Jewish boys are going to sit down and come up with this? It's just, they've just trashed everything about their own faith. Paul walked away. You've read the stuff about his credentials. Was Paul in pretty good shape if he had ignored the whole Jesus thing? Yeah. He's the best tribe, and he had the best education, and he's, up in the top notch of that civilization. All he has to do is just ignore all of this, but something turned his life upside down. And what did these disciples have to gain from this? J. Warner Wallace said there are only three things that people get, as they commit crimes and all, sex, money, or power. And they didn't get anything by turning into this faith. They got persecuted, and as far as we know, not a single one ever recanted. They all went to terrible deaths, except maybe John, on that island. But I mean, honest to goodness, how do you get a religion started like that? It's so different than the culture that it comes from within. And it starts in Jerusalem. And you run around and you tell the people, hey, this guy came back from the dead, and his tomb is empty, and it starts in Jerusalem? What are you going to do if you don't buy it? You go check that tomb out, or you go drag the body out or something, and that's the end of that. But it starts right there. So how in the world do you get a religion started inside that culture that flips that culture upside down? There had to have been something amazing that happened. How do you get a brother who put down Jesus while he was alive? Remember, James is part of the family that says, let's get Jesus out of here. He's nuts. That was their attitude. And all of a sudden, he's the leader of the church. You meet him in Acts, and he's running a church council there, and he gets put to death, according to Josephus. I mean, anyway, so I think that's a really powerful argument. So here was the first of the three for tonight. And again, I'm not in any hurry, so we'll see how it goes. But you've heard this thing, why doesn't God write something across the sky? I'm God. Or why doesn't he pick up a mountain and wave it around, and the voice thunders and we all go, oh, okay, I've got to get my act together. But God is really subtle. And we have a hard time saying, yeah, he's real. And well, show me God. And it's tough. So, Rick, you want to?
At one time, he did write across the sky.
One time he did ride across the sky in hoc signo vinces, and Constantine saw it and converted the Roman Empire to Christianity.
Oh.
Walked the Roman army through the river and had the priests sprinkle them, baptizing them.
Okay, yeah, that's Constantine in the 300s. Went out and fought in the name of God, apparently, the sign in the sky, and succeeded. And then he allowed the Christian faith to flourish and not be persecuted anymore. What else would you say? Because God isn't obvious. I've thought about that. I've thought, man, wouldn't that be neat? You know, the heavens crack apart and this supernatural glow comes out, and this wonderful James Earl Jones kind of voice. You know, you got to have the right voice. I am God. What were you going to say, Alan?
He's been very much somebody that says, you invite me in or we'll leave you alone if you want me to.
Okay.
I mean, the most powerful creature in the universe. If you invite me in, I'll come and take care of you. And if you tell me to leave, I'll leave. He just has not been intrusive.
Mm-hmm. So he expects people to do a little bit of the reaching, and he's there if you do the reaching. Rick, did you have?
It'll be a little different when he comes back.
Do you have something, Rick?
Yeah, I was just going to say something like Alan said, that he talked in parables. Jesus talked in parables, and he told his followers got what the parables were, but the others who weren't seeking him or seeking God didn't understand it. They were a mystery. So part of it is it's a mystery for the ones that he's calling. For the mystery of the people he's not calling, and once he is calling, then he reveals what the meaning is in the scriptures or whatever, reveals himself to them. Like they talked about the Muslims seeing visions now and being converted and all over different areas that don't have the opportunity to have the Bible and be witnessed to because of the persecution. Yeah. He's being obvious and presenting himself, and they're being turning to him right now. But part of it's a mystery. Part of it's not everybody. The road is wide that leads to destruction, and the narrow path, there's only a few that are going to see.
Yeah. Tracy's got it.
I'd say this is more of an opinion than anything, but I kind of see a lot of parallels in the way that God has dealt with humanity over the years to the way that parents raise their children. That when they're young, they don't know any better. We're right there holding their hand. We're visible all the time. And yet as they grow up, as they learn, we kind of back off and say, okay, eventually you're mature. You know enough. I don't have to be here with you all the time. And I kind of see the same thing that, as, beginning from Adam and Eve, God was right there holding their hand because they needed it. And they didn't have the law, didn't have scriptures, didn't have the track record. And then as humanity matured, we have the foundation, we've got the track record, we've got the scriptures, we have everything we need to live life without seeing God in front of us. We've got the means or the evidence for faith that we don't need him there right in front of us all the time to know that he's really there.
Yeah. You were going to say something too.
My simple answer is God is obvious. You must not be looking for him.
That's a good point, isn't it?
Life is so complicated, and so we are so extrinsically made. Intelligent design just points to a higher being.
Yeah.
So if you're looking for him, you will find him.
We're living at a terrific time. I always say that, probably bore people, but if we lived 100 years ago and we were meeting like this, we didn't have the ability to look on the small scale like you're talking about. We didn't have the ability to look out in the universe like we can today, and more and more evidence is piling up that everything is just perfect. It's like a well-made clock. This universe, it's better than that, and all these things, yeah, they just scream that there's a God out there. I always thought this was really sad, but in the movie Contact, in the book Contact, I mean, I like Carl Sagan. I thought he was a good popularizer of science. He writes this book, Contact, you may have seen it, about how will we know if there's life in the universe? It's if we get a signal. How would we know if it's a signal? It's got to be some kind of intelligence of some kind. It can't be just a random on-off, 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 because maybe that's some sort of pulsar just spinning around. So instead, they get prime numbers that are beamed down to the Earth, and they go, man, that's a sign of intelligence. It's prime numbers, and it's in a sequence. So they're going, that's intelligence. That's organized complexity. And yet Carl Sagan, I mean, I hope he changed toward the end of his life, but as far as I know, he was not a believer. Every one of his cells and every one of our cells is screaming design. We've got a much more complex set of codes inside of us than simply prime numbers. We've got 3 billion, in each cell, there are 3 billion chemical bases that make up DNA. If you take the DNA that's in one of your cells, I was just reading this the other day, you take DNA that's in one of your cells and you stretch it out, it goes to 6 feet. And they said if you took the DNA of all your cells, remember all it is, that's computer code, but it's a 4-digit code, not binary on and off. It's 4 digits. It's 4 different chemicals that are telling your body how to build enzymes. So if you took all of the DNA and stretched it all out, it would go from one side of the solar system to the other. Think about that. That's just every one of us. And all of that stuff is just information, telling your body how to build you, telling your body how to keep you going. And Sagan couldn't see that. I don't get it. I just think that's so sad. He's looking for some kind of sign from outer space, and the only way he knows is if it comes in the form of intelligence, somehow, some intelligent information. But our bodies are full of DNA Britannicas, Encyclopedia Britannicas. So, yeah, I think that's a great answer, too. And we've already touched on that first one. God is a gentleman, I think, and allows us to make the decision rather than arm twisting us. And I think if he was really, really obvious, there'd be a lot of people that'd be kind of ticked about that, saying, you're forcing me. You're like pushing me down on my knees so that I will honor you because you've revealed yourself so much. Because a lot of people that really don't want there to be a God. They're not all that open. They're not all that searching. They're not all that anxious to find God. You probably heard me say this before, but there's some very famous people that said, I don't want there to be a God in the universe. Aldous Huxley said that. He said, it'll spoil my morality. I won't have a chance to fool around with any woman I want. It's going to change the way I do politics. I want power politics, and I can't do that if there's a God. So I choose to reject that. Thomas Nagel, NYU professor, he said, I don't want there to be a God. I don't want the universe to be like that. So people like those and others, Christopher Hitchens, I think they would just talk about God as a bully if he made himself that obvious. Of course, then the question is, what constitutes obvious? God ought to be more obvious. I don't know what that means, first of all. I think if they saw God doing something in the sky, they'd just go get an MRI. Right? I mean, that's the first thought is not going to be, there's a God out there. I better pay attention to what he wants from me. And I think, and we've touched on this already, but I think the problem mostly is willful refusal. And this is something you might think about. I love this question. This is from Frank Turek. He said, if you're talking to somebody that's, asking for more evidence, that's not enough, give me more evidence. I wish God was more obvious. I wish God would do something in the sky. He says, you can ask him this question. If I could prove to you that Christianity was true, or plug in, or if I could prove to you that God was real, would you become a Christian? He said he has heard so many people say no. So obviously the problem is not the obvious, God being obvious or the proof from the Bible or anything like that. It's just simply the heart says, no, I don't want that. Bob?
Some of those individuals, probably if something serious happens in their life.
So say that again.
Yeah, if something happens in their life, something really, really serious, that could be the door that would open.
Yeah, all of a sudden an illness or, yeah. Yeah, it's easy to be philosophically an atheist until you're hurting. I always liked Steve. He said when he dealt with people who are hurting, he's up at the hospital a lot. He says, do you have any resources? And they say, I got friends, I got family. And then his next question is what? Do you know where he went with that? Yeah, do you have any spiritual resources? And that just opened up, a way for him to get into Christian talk there. So I thought that was nice too. Okay, so let's do this. I want to introduce you to Greg Kokel. We've talked about him. Steve and I always talk about him. I'd like you to actually see him in action. So there's a series, little DVDs called Faith Under Fire. It was a show that was only on for a little while on some kind of obscure network. Probably about 8 homes got it. But it was a series called Faith Under Fire. And Lee Strobel would be the host, and he'd bring in 2 people that would disagree about something. And sometimes it was a J.P. Moreland, pretty sharp guy, debating somebody about whatever it was. Well, he's got this one that deals with this issue. Is Jesus really the only way? How can you say he's the only way? We live in an age of religious pluralism. Everybody's got a road to God. And so we've got Greg Kokel. Let me skip ahead here. So we got Lee Strobel, the famous journalist who became a Christian, and Greg Kokel to represent the Christian view, and then a guy named Kenneth Bowers. Very nice guy, by the way. So you'll see. And I'd like you to watch this exchange that they have. And Bowers is like real high up. I don't know if he's the ultimate, but he's real high up in the Baha'i faith. And I thought that was an interesting choice rather than Jehovah's Witness or Islam or something, because the Baha'i are like all-encompassing. They're the perfect example of religious pluralism. So let me explain this briefly. Here's from the Baha'i website. They call it one light, many lamps. Do you hear the religious pluralism there? And I don't know if you can see these names, but Krishna is at the bottom, Moses, Buddha, Jesus, Muhammad, and the Baha'i. And what they say is that God, over time, revealed a little more, a little more, a little more, a little more, and that they're all prophets. Let me skip ahead here. That God has sent these prophets over time as educators to help us understand things. So these are some of the prophets. And is Jesus in there? Yeah, he's part of it. And then the latest, remember there's a string of them. Latest is, I'm not sure how they pronounce it, Baha'u'llah, explained that the religions of the world come from the same source. Remember that image of the star or whatever it is, the light? And that they are successive chapters of one religion. So we're all in this together. It's a unity of religions. And it was established by this guy back in the 1800s. So it's a fairly recent religion, a little bit more recent than Joseph Smith. And it started in the Middle East. He was Iranian himself. Got himself put in jail for all of his troubles because obviously Islam was not crazy about that idea. But they have something like 5 to 8 million adherents these days. That's pretty good size. That kind of surprised me. Have you ever run into Baha'i anywhere? Really? Vietnam. Okay. An American or Vietnamese?
The chapel took us on a tour downtown Da Nang to the Baha'i temple.
Oh, they have a temple there. Okay. Oh. Where'd you?
Actually, in Haifa, in Israel.
Really?
So the Baha'i, like gardens and stuff like that.
Oh, wow. I don't know if there's anything around here that's a Baha'i temple or anything. That doesn't ring a bell for me. Okay, so let's do this. It's a 2-part. It's going to be really short. It's like 6 minutes. So what I'd like you to do is to watch it, not only watch the ideas, but look how Greg Kokel interacts with these people. And let's talk about it then. So, yeah, this will probably knock off the rest of the evening here. So it's 2 5 or 6 minute episodes, but we'll talk about it in between.
Gary, you got to push the button on the white.
Right. Thank you. I'm sorry. I've got the lights. Okay. So you can see them there. Yeah. Yeah. Turn this on.
Welcome to Faith Under Fire. My friend Mark Middleberg and I were leading a discussion about spiritual topics with a group of 6 people who weren't Christians. They were spiritual seekers with different faith perspectives. Mark was curious about what they would think of Jesus' words when he said, "I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me." So he recited the verse, but before he could even ask his question, one of the participants blurted out, "That's arrogant." Frankly, I wasn't surprised by that kind of reaction. In fact, when I was an atheist, that's exactly what I thought about these exclusive claims of Jesus. So what's your gut reaction to Jesus' statement? Do you believe there's one route to heaven, or that all roads ultimately lead to God? We're going to tackle that topic today by hearing a debate between 2 experts on the matter. I hope you'll carefully consider their viewpoints, keep an open mind, and then offer your own opinion in your group. I have a feeling this is going to be a very lively session, so have a great discussion. Do all roads lead to God? You've probably heard people say, all religions basically teach the same thing. So it doesn't matter what you believe because they're all going to get you to the same place in the end. But is that really true? We want to put that to the test. I'd like you to meet Kenneth Bowers, a member of the national governing body of the Baha'is of the United States and author of God Speaks Again, an introduction to the Baha'i faith. And Gregory Kokel, president of Stand to Reason and author of the book Relativism, Feet Firmly Planted in Midair. So, Ken, let me begin with you. Let me just see if I understand the Baha'i religion correctly. It says that God has progressively revealed his plan for humankind through a series of prophets. And those prophets would include Abraham, Zoroaster, Moses, Krishna, Buddha, Jesus, Muhammad. So, in a sense, all these world religions are part of the same grand unfolding truth, and consequently, ultimately, all roads lead to God. Is that a fair assessment is my first question. My second question is, why do you believe that?
Well, first of all, I think it's fairly accurate. I would say that instead of all these different roads leading to God, another way of putting it would be that there is one God who has revealed the same path through all of these different divine messengers throughout history. And a metaphor that might be used to explain it would be that of, say, a school where we're the students, and from time to time we get a teacher who teaches us certain lessons, and then we progress to the next, and so on and so forth. As to why I believe it, I believe that that is perfectly compatible with the religious scriptures of these great world religions. Baha'u'llah, the founder of the Baha'i faith, wrote extensively about this, and I find his explanation of this truth to be compelling and convincing.
Greg, is that the way you see things?
Well, there's a fundamental problem, it seems to me, Lee, in this way to approach it. The question is whether there is really one path described here or not. Let's face it, Jesus claimed to be the Messiah. Either he was the Messiah or he's not the Messiah. If he's not the Messiah, the Jews are right and the Christians are wrong. If he is the Messiah, then the Christians are right and the Jews are wrong. But under no circumstance can they both be right. When you die, you either go to heaven or hell, or you get reincarnated, or you get absorbed into God, or you lie in the grave, but you can't do them all. Now, I want to point out here, Lee, this is not some small difference between these religions. These are differences at a structural level. In other words, these are totally different frameworks. It's like saying that a computer and a car are basically the same because they both have knobs and flashing lights. I mean, there are differences here that are critical. You can't drive a computer.
Okay, Ken, what about this allegation, then, that there's a self-contradiction involved in what you believe?
Well, I just don't think there is a contradiction. And, of course, what we have to do, one of the challenges is to separate what people who believe in the religions think about their scriptures versus what the scriptures actually say. And to use the example of the Jews and the Christians, for example, only one can be right and the other must be wrong. Well, a Christian would say that the Jewish interpretation of the Old Testament is wrong if that leads them to reject the Messiah, but not that the Old Testament itself says something wrong about the nature of God or that it didn't originate from God.
Yeah, well, I guess people are going to have to judge for themselves, Lee, on this one, but look at the claims that Jesus made. Certainly there are scriptures that are difficult to understand. There's no question about that. There can be debate about these things. But that Jesus claimed to be the Messiah is not difficult at all. It's central to his view. That Jesus claimed to be God himself and not just one of the prophets, that he claimed to be the only way to salvation, is foundational to his view. Now, when Jews reject that, I can think they may be mistaken. Okay, maybe I'm wrong and maybe they're right. That's not the issue here. Right. My point simply is they can't both be right.
How do you answer that, Ken?
Well, I think, first of all, it is impossible for contradictory things to be true at the same time. And we don't argue that different contradictory propositions are all equally valid and equally true. In fact, we happen to believe that Jesus was who he claimed to be, and that anyone who doesn't interpret the Old Testament that would lead in a way that would lead them to believe in Jesus would be incorrect. And so we don't say, well, the Jews are correct and the Christians are correct. We don't go with that. With respect to Hinduism, for example, if you go back to the actual Hindu scriptures, what you find is that they're remarkably similar to the teachings of the Bible. Now, it's true that over the course of centuries, there have been interpretations that have been added, but in terms of the existence of a supreme being, it's there. In the case of Buddha, I've heard it said, for example, that he taught that there is no God, but of course he didn't, that it's rather the contrary. He said that there is.
This isn't going to work, and I'll tell you why. In Hinduism, Atman is Brahman, and Brahman is Atman. All distinctions are illusion. This is Maya. The only thing that exists is God, and he's an impersonal force. That is classic monistic Hinduism. This is their belief. Now, right now I'm not arguing that they're wrong. Maybe they're right, and maybe my view of a personal God is wrong. What I'm saying is there is no way to bring these things together.
Well, I think he's right. There are some right and some wrong interpretations, and one of them is an interpretation of the Hindu scriptures that it teaches monism, that everything is God. It really doesn't. Go back to the Vedas. It really doesn't do that. And what Baha'u'llah is challenging people to do in his teachings is to go back to the original sources and take away the interpretations and the mainstream assumptions and everything that you hear people saying that it says. Baha'u'llah puts forward a very rational argument that that, in fact, isn't what the origin of these religions actually taught.
Are you saying
you can go back and find a very compelling argument that that's the case.
Well, are you saying that when there are these discrepancies and incompatibilities between these religions, that that's a product of later development or assumptions that people make or reading things into it? Is that what you're saying?
Right. Well, that's part of it. Baha'u'llah himself said that one of the issues with religion is that it has a progressive nature. That is that as these divine teachers, as these messengers come, they do shed more and more light on spiritual truth. And that's something that would continue into the future. But the second thing is that the followers of those religions over time, particularly the older the religion is, tend to add their own interpretations and bring in other things from their cultures and their own limited understandings and make those primary beliefs that weren't really part of the original teachings.
Lee, there's a lot of truth to what he says about interpretations and the like, and I think we can sympathize with Ken's remarks there. But listen what he's asking us to understand, though, and to believe. He's asking us to believe that essentially all of the major religions represented in the world today have gotten it wrong, and Baha'u'llah has gotten it right. And he sees what most of the other leaders and theologians of those religions don't see. There are debates about what the meanings of these things are, but we have to believe that the essential criterion and the essential structure of these religions are just simply wrong to agree that they can all come together under the teaching of Baha'i. You can get books on comparative religion. They give the basic outlines from the primary source documents of about what these religions believe. I don't think they can all go together, neither do the people who are the major adherents. And this isn't simply a matter of people just having their opinions and accretions of interpretations over time. These go back to the original documents and the original founders of these religions.
I just thought it was interesting on a lot of levels because, as an example, did you hear Strobel say, is this what you believe? And he ran through the basic beliefs, and he said, if you believe this, why? I mean, can you hear the two questions that are always part of that Kokol tactic, which apparently Lee Strobel is employing, which is clarify, let's make sure we're understanding what we're saying, which is a great thing, no matter what you're talking about, just making sure everybody's on the same wavelength. Then he says, why? That's the second question. Once you say, okay, these are your beliefs, got it, why do you believe that? So I thought that was a nice intro by Strobel. So do you have some thoughts or comments about how Greg went about it, or how Bowers went about it, or how the discussion went, or did you see any problems with the way they were trying to approach things, or Rick?
The one that Lee Strobel was doing,
Lee Strobel gave him a way out. He didn't back him into a corner and say that our way, the Christian way, was the only way. He said we could be right, or we could be wrong. You could be right. Mm-hmm. You could be wrong. So he gave him a platform to discuss stuff without getting their hackles up and making them on the defensive.
Yeah. And I've heard Greg do that on his radio show. He'll say, well, I could be wrong. And that's a hard thing for a Christian to do because we're invested in Christianity. We think it's right. But, I mean, honest to goodness, let's face it, outside of mathematics, are you 100% sure of anything? I don't think so. I mean, we've got a certain level of comfort and a certain level of, we think it's correct. But I like that. That shows a lot of humility to say, I could be wrong. Let's just look at the issues. And so I thought that was effective. Anything else that you noticed or comments that you had?
Yeah, contradictions that they couldn't, you can't have contradictory beliefs, so a lot of those faiths are contradicting each other. So it's like Steve was saying, I can't be.
Yeah, the law of non-contradiction. Yeah. Yeah.
Kind of thing, so.
Yeah, Bowers is trying to say, if you could go back to the original documents, you'd find that they don't disagree, that it's only been interpretations and, yeah. And the first thing I thought of, and you probably have your own ideas, Jesus dies on the cross. I mean, that's in every one of the Gospels. That's what Paul says. And that's in the original documents. Now, go to Islam, and it's not their ideas. It's right in the Quran. What happened to Jesus? Did he die on the cross? No. There's a substitute made. Does Jesus, is he the Son of God? I mean, it says it all through the New Testament, and Jesus calls himself the Son of God, and he's the Son of Man. He makes all these huge claims about himself, and that's not what the Quran teaches. So it's not a case of some imam 2,000 years later is now saying Jesus is not the Son of God. They've said it all the way through, and they reject that, and they call it the sin of, I'll forget the term. That there's only one God and he's not broken into pieces. There's not God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. Huh?
Abrogation.
Well, yeah, that's something different. But I mean, shirk. I think it's called the sin of shirk. Yeah. That says you now are saying God is more than one. Well, that's not, again, something that has come about later on. It's right in the New Testament and it's right in the Quran. You got two different gods. Allah and the God of the Bible, they're two different gods. I don't know how you reconcile those things. Somebody else had a hand or something, I thought. No? Okay. What's interesting to me is how Coco flipped it around on Bowers, that we are called arrogant to say that Jesus is the only way. Oh, you're so arrogant. You got all these other religions. And what did Coco say? He said, it's actually arrogant to claim that you're the one that can see the pluralism out there. And you're the only one that's discovered that all the Buddhists are wrong and all the Hindus are wrong and all the Christians are wrong and all the Muslims are wrong, but you've got it right. You can see it better. And I thought that was kind of interesting. So it's kind of reversing the thing about, you're so arrogant to think you're right. Well, they think they're just as right as we do. I don't know, why are we the arrogant ones, but they're not? So I thought he called them on that pretty well. I like it, too, because he kept saying, let's look at the claims of Jesus. And we don't want to put our hides out there to get beat up. We can. It's Jesus, so always bring him out to whatever he has to say. Okay, well let's just see the last. It's about 5 more minutes. It's the second part of this.
Now, Ken and Greg, there's a parable that some people use when talking about this kind of topic. It's about an elephant and some blind men who are feeling the elephant. And one of them feels the side of the elephant and says, oh, the elephant's a wall. And one feels a leg and says, oh, it's a tree. And one feels a trunk and say, oh, it's a snake. Another one feels the ears and says, oh, it's a fan. But the king sees the whole truth. Ken, does that shed any light on understanding what you're saying here?
I think it's an imperfect metaphor because what that implies is that human beings, without any help from God, are trying to figure things out the best way they can, and everyone's getting a take on it, and it's just as good as any other take. I think that the Baha'i faith doesn't really teach that at all. It teaches that God is very active in human history, has sent these teachers for our education, and has revealed truth to us. So it's hard for me to buy in completely to that metaphor.
Okay, great.
What I'd like to say,
No, I agree with Ken. I think that's a good observation in that because it implies that we're all blind. And in fact, if we're all blind, then why should we believe the parable of the elephant? Because that's just another blind person leading the blind. What's interesting about the parable is that in the parable, there is a king who sees the way the world really is. And I think there's a value here in understanding that human beings can get some things right, but then there's some points of confusion as well. And this is why we need the king who sees all the way it really is to tell us the way reality is so that he can correct our misperceptions.
And what does that king tell us, Greg, in your opinion?
In this particular case, we have God who's revealed himself through the scriptures and finally through Jesus, whom the Baha'i faith looks to as a prophet. And I think this is great. Let's look carefully at what Jesus says about himself. The curious thing, Lee, is that Jesus was not a pluralist. In fact, he was a Jew, which first commandment was there should be no other gods before the real God. Moses offered that. There is one God. The God of the Bible was not a pluralist. He condemned all of those other false religions of the time, and Jesus followed in that tradition, saying he was the only way of salvation. He didn't say that there are more people coming after him. In fact, it's interesting that Baha'u'llah sees Matthew 24, which is Jesus' last major discourse, as a fulfillment of prophecy of himself, when indeed Jesus only prophesied that there would be false messiahs and false prophets that were coming there. You can read it yourself, Matthew 24. It's very easy to follow. The disciples ask, what is the sign of your coming? And the end of the age, Jesus said, I'm telling you in advance, don't be misled. And then gives 3 different warnings about false messiahs. And then he says, I will come in the sky so everyone will see me. This cannot be misunderstood. But Baha'u'llah takes this as a prophecy, not of false messiahs, but of him coming in the future, when Jesus meant just the exact opposite.
Well, how do you respond to that, Ken? I mean, he's accusing your prophet of being false, I think, if I'm understanding it.
Well,
right.
that's exactly what he's doing. But remember, when Jesus was alive, that's exactly what happened to Jesus. You know, Greg mentioned a little while ago that Baha'u'llah is making claims that stand against the received wisdom of countless adherents of these major religions, and he's just asking us to buy into this stuff.
No, people can read the text for themselves. Read the words of Jesus for themselves.
Okay, that's important to say. That's important to say because, and it's also important to remember what happened when Jesus himself appeared, because if it were up to a vote, then Jesus would have to be wrong.
I'm not saying it should be up to a vote. I'm saying that you should listen to the words of Jesus himself.
You said because it's against the prevailing viewpoints of the members of these religions.
Ken, I said that you should listen to what Jesus had to say himself. Jesus gave Matthew 24 a discourse in which he answers a question asked by his disciples, what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? And the very first thing he says is he offers warnings against false messiahs. Now, I'm not talking about the accretion and interpretation over the last 2,000 years.
I've read the New Testament.
Okay,
Greg, I've read the New Testament,
and it's not unclear.
They should read it for themselves. They should read it for themselves, and they should also investigate what Baha'u'llah had to say about that, because he gives a very plausible and rational explanation for those verses in the text. Well, you can say that it's wrong, Greg,
no,
but
I'm not saying it's wrong.
I find it perfectly compatible.
I'm not saying it's wrong. That's not my point here. I think it is wrong. But what I'm saying is when you put the prophecy of Baha'u'llah, his interpretation of Jesus, next to the words of Jesus themselves, he isolates a couple of phrases from there about clouds and power and lightning and things like that. When you read the entire passage, you see that those terms fall into a context of a greater thing, a clear description of Jesus' second coming with warnings about false prophets who would even give miracles. There is a narrow gate. There will be false messiahs. There will be false Christ, and Jesus himself will return to this earth.
Yeah. I think that's a lost cause. Once you start talking over each other, the whole thing starts falling apart there. But they brought up that parable of the blind men and the elephant, and I'm sure you've heard it before, but just real quickly, it's a small village in India, supposedly, and they bring an elephant in for the first time, and a bunch of blind people are feeling this elephant, and one feels the leg and says, oh, an elephant's a pillar, and another's got the tail and says it appears to be like a snake, and one grabs the tusk and says it's like a spear. And finally, it's just they're all arguing, and the king or the Raja comes out and says, shut up. you're all seeing a little bit of the truth. And the idea is you religious pluralists, got the right picture. It's these Hindus and it's these Christians and it's these Jehovah's Witnesses. All these people are the blind people. And it's a terrible illustration because it says somebody is seeing, and the religious pluralist is going to be the arrogant one again because he or she is going to say, I'm the one that can see the truth about God, and all you religious people are the ignorant blind ones. That's pretty arrogant. I can see. You can't. The other variation of that is the one about all roads leading up the mountain, and they're all, Hindus are up one road, and they can't see this other road on the other side of the mountain, but those are the Christians, and you got the Buddhists someplace else. And it's the same problem. It says they're all going to go up to God, and they can't see each other, but somehow the religious pluralists can see them all. So he's up above or she's up above with this godlike view. How'd that person get in the helicopter when nobody else can get in the helicopter? How'd that person get that view? That's arrogant again. I'm godlike, and I can see more than my trail. I can see everybody's trail. So, I think that's a terrible illustration, but it's been used a lot. And actually, I thought it was interesting. Both of them saw the problems with that. I like Kokol at least saying, I agree with Ken. They're looking for common ground. I thought that worked pretty well. Agree where you can. And then Jesus not being a pluralist, I thought was a good point. Again, if you can get Jesus into the argument rather than just Christianity, Jesus should be the one. So that's why he's referring to Matthew 24 and saying Jesus is not a pluralist. At the end, and I'll just sum this up, but Strobel says he actually goes through some differences there because obviously as a Christian, he's going to wrap it up the way he wants to. And he does point out specific differences between these religions. And he says we ought to trust Jesus. It's not a blind faith, which I thought was a good point. But anyway, I'd ask you to think about it during the week. Are there any other things that you would add to that when somebody says, how can you say Jesus is just the only way? By the way, that should give you an introduction at least to how Greg Koukl talks. If you have a chance to listen to him sometime on his podcast, str.org, he speaks so well. I mean, he's just amazing. I'm impressed with him. But was there anything you thought about during this week if somebody says to you, oh, you think Jesus is the only way, when there's this whole world full of religions? Yeah, Rick?
I read something today in the God decision, the God question by J.P. Moreland that really I got a kick out of. He's contrasting a scientist that gets in there, and this guy's views are the pure environmental naturalism. So he found out that's what that guy's key there. And the guy was making the argument there's no reason for conscious thought and moral values. So the way he brought it around, he told this guy, I have 4 friends, and once a month we throw $50 a piece into this pot. And then we go out and we get a 100-gallon tank of sulfuric acid. And we go dump it in the lake. And count the number of dead fish that rise. And the person who gets closest to the number wins the pot. And of course, the guy's neck starts bulging with all the So the fact that got right into his heart, the argument you're making there just makes no sense at all. We all have a value system, and we do have a moral value, even if you say there is no scientific basis for having that.
Yeah. Anything else you might say to somebody that says you're being awfully narrow-minded? Let me share just a couple of things to think about. Why are we saying Jesus is the only way? He's the only one that solved the problem. He's the only one who is God. He can take care of this huge sin problem that we have. I mean, you think about what these other religious leaders do. It doesn't matter who it is. All they give you are routes, stuff you got to do. The eightfold path, that's Buddhism. So he offers 8 ways. Islam has 5 pillars. But I mean, they all have stuff you got to get going. So now you see the Jehovah's Witnesses walking down the streets and the Mormons are doing this, and everybody's got this stuff. Jesus is totally different. I've got a whole talk sometime. You can go on my website or the church website. Just the uniqueness of Jesus. He's not just one more religious leader. He's so different than all the others. He's the only one that has solved the problem. Everybody else says, good luck. I hope you can do it. And by the way, truth is narrow, isn't it? Yeah, Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. The truth, really? If he's the truth, it's narrow. And one more time, who's making the claim? We're not making the claim. Jesus made the claim, I am the way, the truth, and the life. All we're doing is saying this is what Jesus said. We're pointing to Jesus. So that should take some of the pressure off us. We're not being arrogant. We're not being narrow-minded. Jesus is one. You got the problem, then you got the problem with Jesus. You don't have the problem with us. And then we already talked about these two pictures, and they're misleading. Let's do this. We'll do this contradiction thing next time. Obviously, we don't have enough time today, but that was one of those things you want to think about. You probably heard people say things like that. How can you believe the Bible is just full of contradictions? I'll tease you with a few of them. The order, if you take a look at the order of the temptations of Jesus, they're not in the same order in two of the Gospels. Take a look at the resurrection of Jesus. How many angels were there? Well, we hear in one Gospel there's one angel. Another Gospel says there was two angels. There were two angels. Look at the genealogies of Jesus. Wow. They get real different real fast. So people look at that and go, what? What's going on here? John has Jesus cleansing the temple as he starts his ministry. Luke and Matthew, I think I got it right. I don't think Mark talks. Luke and Matthew have him cleansing the temple when? This is the one you usually see in movies. When is he cleansing the temple? At the end. Yeah, at the end of his ministry. That's like, well, that really set the Jews off, and so they got to figure out ways to kill him. So, I mean, these are the kinds of things that you're going to hear. Frankly, a lot of people couldn't name you one contradiction, but they think there are contradictions in the Bible. But think about during the week, and do Google search if you want. Remind me, and I'll send you some resources of some good books to think about. But think about this during the week, and let's kick that around next time. And Steve will be back, and so we'll share our time. So he'll be sending you some things to think about as well. Yeah.
When talking about one belief in being the only way, and the Baha'i faith is talking to you about their faith, they want you to believe. When talking about one faith and believing it's the only way, whoever you're talking to believes that their faith is the only way. So really, it's...
Yeah, we're called exclusive, but every faith is exclusive.
Every faith is exclusive.
Buddha broke off of Hinduism because he thought they were wrong. By the way, I looked it up just for fun. There's like a Reformed Baha'i. I loved it. They've separated, you heathen, so whatever. They've got their own thing. Got Reformed Baha'i. Anyway, so we'll pick this up next week. Thank you all for coming out, especially with the wet weather. I hope your place is okay. And I was out digging a little ditch today to get the water to move along. But anyway, so thank you all for coming out. I'll go ahead and close. Father, I thank you for the group coming out, and thank you for the interest among the people here. And I pray that we'll carry the message of the truth of Christianity, make the case in our own way as we interact with people. And I think about Larry's family of Pat, and I pray that you'll give them peace and comfort. And it's good to know that Larry's a Christian and that he's more alive now than he's been in his 50 or 60 years prior. And I just pray for just a sweet time together for their family. And guide us as we go about the rest of this week, and pray this in your Son's name. Amen. Still some good things over there. Don't forget the book and a DVD.